Hello there, good people. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to look at one of the most important films in cinema history in a way, the story of the Kelly gang. Well, at least in terms of history, right? We're going to watch the film together while I tell you some important things while we watch. So let's go ahead. Make my day. Now, I think it's important to note that the film that we are watching today is completely silent. However, that's not the way it was supposed to be experienced. Back in the days, it was shown with live orchestra, live music and narration. But this is just how the film is shown today. This is what we have. So what's this film about, you might ask? The film is about Ned Kelly, this controversial figure, one of the most biggest legend of Australian history in a way. But this film, rather than presenting him simply as a criminal, presents him as this folk hero. So that's that's pretty interesting. I guess it's less about factual detail and more about how myths can somehow be created and remembered. Before we really get into the story itself, it's worth pausing for a moment to talk about why this film is so important. The story of the Kelly gang is often cited as the first feature-length narrative film in cinema history. That claim is sometimes debated. But what's not debated is that this film represents a turning point, a moment where cinema stops being a novelty and starts becoming storytelling. Prior to this, most films were extremely short, a few minutes at most. Just imagine that films are just about, 150 years old? Or not even that. So, that's just, wow, put that in perspective. Because we take so many things for granted, don't we? In today's, modern age, but this is, wow. You see, prior to this, most films were extremely short, a few minutes at most. They were attractions rather than narratives. People went to see movement, spectacle, novelty, a train arriving at a station, a gag, a trick. The idea that an audience would sit through a sustained dramatic story with characters, moral conflict, and narrative development was still new. This film arrives at an exact moment when, cinema is trying to figure out what it wants to be. If you look at films from the late 1800s and early 1900s, they're often very theatrical in their staging. The camera is very static. Scenes are played frontally, almost like a stage performance. Obviously it was so new at the time. Editing is minimal or non-existent. The idea of cinematic language like close-up, cross-cutting, subjective camera hasn't fully formed yet at that time. So when a film like this attempts to tell a long, continuous story, it's doing so without a fully developed grammar. It's inventing the rules as it goes. What's especially striking here is the extensive use of outdoor locations, which we will see soon enough. So shortly afterwards, Constable Fitzpatrick arrives. There we go. It was kind of unusual to be shooting on locations like this. Wow, this is beautiful looking at it. Just imagine all of these people making this back in the days when it was so new. Oh, this is just so fantastic. This is amazing. What is he doing? Taking this woman. What are you doing with her, sir? Stop that! Somebody please stop him. Oh, what an abs. Oh, there we go. Good, sir. Exactly what I wanted. Give him a warning shot. That's what we do. So Ned Kelly comes in to save the day. At least I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be him. In the surviving footage of this film, the characters are not clearly introduced or identified in the way that we're used to today. But, however, the man that we see here violently confront the officer, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Ned Kelly. It's all over the place, but as we'll see when we continue the movie. But still, it's a lovely experience watching the movie. I'm not saying that. Let's keep on going. Yeah, just shoot him. He deserves it. Yeah, go right ahead. That bastard, that farting idiot. Anywho. Yeah, tell him, madam. Yeah, tell him to just, go his way. The bastard. Here we have Elizabeth Tate, who was a stage actress, as so many of the actors back then. Anywho, early cinema was tied to theater, you see, because that's what they knew. The people behind this film, they knew how to do theater. They didn't really know how to do this. But, they were experimenting. So at this point, the filmmakers relied heavily on performers who were already comfortable projecting emotion through some exaggerated gestures and, being so physical. You see, skills that were essential and they were developed for the stage rather than the camera, but that's how it is. The police camp in the Wombat Ranges. Constable Kennedy and Scanlon have already left in search of a new campsite. Oh, they have, haven't they? Filming on location was still unusual. Many films were shot indoors with painted backdrops, partly for practical reasons, I suppose, light control, stability, predictability in a way. But here the landscape is very real, the space is real, the environment becomes part of the storytelling. This is one of the reasons the cinematography feels so alive. You're not just watching actors perform, you're watching bodies move through real space, you see. That's cinema thinking spatially in a way, and that's a major step forward. It was back in the days. At the time, Kelly was already a divisive figure. This film, it contributes to the idea of Kelly as an emblem of resistance, of defiance against authority in a way. Anywho, what are they doing there? Camping, shooting. Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah, let them know that you're here. The police are quickly surrounded by the gang. Yeah, I would assume they were. So I guess you could say cinema here isn't neutral. It's somewhat participating in national identity formation. At least that's yeah. So I mean, there's some famous anecdote that the author of the original novel disliked the film so much that he walked out of the cinema. I'm always hearing stories about people walking out of cinema because they dislike films so much. For example, last film made by Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, the last silent film made by Alfred Hitchcock in 1929. The author of that novel walked out of the cinema as well, The Manxman. See, reactions like this in the cinema were fascinating because, they are fascinating because it speaks to something cinema does very well. Once a story enters the cinematic realm, it no longer belongs solely to its author, you see. It becomes public mythology. And the guns, were they real? Yes, they were, but with blanks. This was all staged very perfectly, I think. And firearms like these were much more accessible back in the days because, obviously that's just how it was. Now, they didn't have to worry about the sound because this is a silent film. So just as long as it comes across, that the smoke and the recoil and the movement mattered, of course, more than realism of sound. But I think it comes off great. It looks pretty real. Yeah. So film has an extraordinary ability to override previous versions of a story in many ways. This film becomes the story for its audience, you see. So, and if you just talk a little bit about acting and performance in a way, the performances here are very much of their time, obviously. They're broad, theatrical, often exaggerated, and that's not a flaw. It's a transitional style. And we see that in films from, in the last 2 decades after this, very, very, very obviously. Fantastic. What's going on there? A reward for your head, probably. Yeah. So this creates a sense of realism, but also distance. We're not guided emotionally through editing, as we are today. So cinema just hadn't yet discovered subtlety in performance because the camera wasn't yet being used expressively enough to support it. So the actor had to really express themselves so theatrically, right? Yeah, anyways. So what's interesting in that acting is often functions more symbolically than physiologically in a way. Characters are types, not interior beings, you see, and that suits the mythic nature of the story. What's going on there? Let's go, guys. Yeah, they have to be theatrical. They have to express what's happening because they felt that it was needed. But this is fantastic. Look at that. Look at the cinematography and this is just the atmosphere and wow. This is amazing. The action sequences that we're looking at, they're especially revealing somehow. That there's very little cutting. The camera tends to stay back, as you saw, observing events unfold in wide shots. What we're watching right now are these 20 minutes of the original film that survived, because the rest was lost due to deterioration, neglect, and just the fragile neglect of early film stock. So early cinema was really fragile in that way. For example, the film Nosferatu almost got completely lost. Well, that was due to a fire, I believe. But just this one print survived. Imagine if you were not able to see that film today, for example. So many of maybe some cinema greats back then are lost to us forever. Only the men are robbed of their valuables. We do not rob ladies or children. No, of course you don't. Wow. The film. Okay, yeah. Hands up. Yeah, I'm sorry. Cinema history is full of abstinence, missing reels, lost films, incomplete records. This film stands as both an achievement and a reminder of what we lost. What I found most compelling about the story of the Kelly Gang isn't just that it's early, it's that it's ambitious. It wants to tell a story that matters. It wants to shape memory. It wants us to use cinema as more than a trick or a novelty. And in doing so, it helps define what cinema would become. There's no hand-holding here. You scan the frame, you decide where to look. So cinematography is the real star. I mean, for me, the real star of the film isn't just the performance. It is the cinematography. I mean, just look at this. What a way to tell a story back then. I'm just in awe of all of this. I mean, these choices we are seeing right now in this filmmaking here, the filmmakers are experimenting with visual storytelling before they probably even, obviously, before they even fully understood what cinema can do. I mean, films like this, they just paved the way for everything that follows. I mean, without experiments like this, there's no Griffith, no Eisenstein, no Hollywood studio systems. I mean, someone had to try to tell a story in this format, and this film did it. This film was made by Charles Trade and his brothers. They were really into theater. They were really experienced theater people. And that is also why the film comes across so much like a stage play, but shot in these real locations. And there's a fly. A fly got into the transformation pod that first time when I was alone. So, I mean, there's, like I said, there's no sound in this film. We're just watching. But what we are watching is fantastic. Early audiences are, were also trained differently in a way. People were more patient with static images, longer scenes, and theatrical pacing, but because that's what this was so new. You can see the camera observes rather than manipulates here. This gives the film a very different rhythm. It's like you're not being told what to feel, you're invited to watch this. Modern viewers today sometimes mistake this for primitiveness, but it's really a different mode of spectatorship. Wow. So if you compare this to later Ned Kelly films, you could say what's striking here is how raw and unpolished this feels, obviously. Later versions refine the myth, smooth the edges, and physiologically deepen the character. Here Kelly it's more symbolic. So I guess you could say that actually aligns the film more closely with folklore than with modern biographical drama. The one thing that's important to keep in mind while watching this is that cinema hasn't yet developed what we think now of as an editing grammar. There's no established idea of continuity, editing, shot, reverse shot, or more emotional close-ups even. Instead, scenes as we're seeing here are playing out almost in real time. So, I mean, films like this, they just don't tell stories. They create memories. For many viewers in 1906, oh no! Ha-ha! Some new togs! Boys at last! A box of cigars! Good enough. Yeah, good enough, I suppose. Yeah, it is, isn't it? So, I mean, if you talk a little bit more about a camera, what we're seeing here, there's just, it's there, but then it goes to here, it goes to here. It's very simple, but it's effective. Simple and effective. Sometimes that's all you need. Camera placement here is doing a lot of quiet, ideological work. When authority figures appear, they're often framed stiffly, centrally. It's almost rigid in a way. Yeah, shoot 'em up, boys. Kelly and his gang, by contrast, move laterally through space. They enter and exit frames dynamically. That difference, it matters, I feel. And I feel that's extraordinary. Just they were able to let that come across so strongly back in the days. I mean, even without close-ups or dramatic lighting, the film uses space to guide our sympathies. And for example, here we've been in this certain space, somewhat similar places and all that for such a long time. The same sort of angles. What's fascinating about the action scenes is that they exist without the language of spectacle we now take for granted. There's no fast cutting, no score pushing emotion. I mean, and yet they still function as an action in this film. So, get behind the house, Dan and Steve. Here comes the trap. Oh my! Oh yeah! There we go. Set him up, boys. Go right ahead. Make my day. This just reminds us that action doesn't come from editing alone. And many of these films today are so roughly edited. It's just hard to watch. It's just too much. I mean, this just reminds us that action doesn't come from that alone. It comes from bodies and spaces, stakes and emotion. That emotional imprint is part of why cinema becomes such a powerful cultural force. Cinema hadn't yet discovered that its job was to explore inner life. At this point, it's more concerned with event, action, and story, the story of the Kelly gang. So I think that shift, towards psychology comes later, and it changes everything. Ned and Dan go through the pockets of all the men. Wow. What's wrong with you? All the pockets. You live in one pocket. You know, while the Internet Movie Database notes that there are a few cinematographers here for this film, I think it's important that we remember that in 1906, the role of director of photography is not as, what we understand it today. These were camera operators and technicians working collaboratively before cinematography became a distinct creative discipline. Notice how space is used to reinforce moral alignment. Kelly is often shown embedded within the landscape, moving with it, blending into it. So many jump cuts, as you can see, which is of course more obvious in earlier cinema, those jump cuts. We still see jump cuts in even the early James Bond films. So I mean, jump cuts here is, nothing unusual for a film from 1906. I mean, these rough cuts, you see. Anywho, I want to mention that cinematographers back in the days, I mean, it took a little bit of time for them to get really noticed, but as it says, I mean, here in this film book, is that, cinematographers, there was this man called Giant Carl Freund, a huge man, and he was really, he was really enthusiastic about cinematography, and he had the camera stuck to himself, and so he would just walk with the camera. I mean, it says here that, he would strap the camera to his body and set it on a bicycle to revolutionize how a movie could look. I mean, imagine that. This robbery is still going on. Lots of guns. Young guns. I mean, all these texts coming on again. I mean, I'm just showing you the film how it is. This is how it was presented. So that's what we're watching now, obviously. I think that's fair. That's just how it is. Dub, dub, dub. It takes quite a bit of time for the text to. I mean, we've already read it. But like I said, this is just how it is. This is the version of the film that we are working with today. So we'll just see it how it is. And what's easy to forget here is that the film wasn't originally tied to a single cinema. It traveled from town to town as an event, which helps explain its episodic structure and I suppose its emphasis on memorable moments rather than tight continuity. Observe and report, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, slow motion. Look at this slow motion. Another text. Yeah. But imagine being there in 1906 with live orchestra and seeing something like this for the first time. I mean, I think I'm putting a lot of emphasis on that, but I find that so fascinating. You see, I mean, obviously, I think you're aware of that I do, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you are. And this is really cinema learning just how to breathe. One of the things I love about early cinema is that you can feel it coming alive. You can feel that it's thinking. It hasn't yet become slick or standardized. There's so much uncertainty here. And the uncertainty of this is beautiful. It often produces innovation in a way. So back then, they had to assume an attentive viewer, someone willing to sit, observe, and engage with the image rather than, be constantly stimulated. I mean, knowing that much of this film is lost adds a layer of melancholy to the experience. We're watching fragments of a larger whole, glimpses of something that once existed in full. Film history is full of these gaps, and yet what survives is enough to justify its reputation. I mean, the violence in the film is interesting because it's rarely sensationalized. So many texts going on, telling the story through text. I mean, what are you going to do? That's just what they did back in the days. I mean, we're watching a film from 1906. Imagine that. Kelly isn't presented here as a deeply conflicted individual. He's a symbol of resistance, of defiance, of justice, of injustice, that is, yeah. His inner life isn't explored because early cinema just isn't interested in interiority. What matters is what he does, not what he feels, you see. So I guess that's why the film often frames him in relation to, action and writing, confronting, moving through space. Another thing about this film is that the robberies are staged, almost ceremonially. So I guess you could say they're not chaotic. They're deliberately controlled, ritualistic. This turns them into performances, reinforcing Kelly's mythic status. In many ways, Kelly is already a legend within the film's world. So what we're seeing here right now is a bit of a phase of texts and images. So, just to fill in the blanks of all these missing footage again. So I guess more that I could tell you about this is that's the fact that in early cinema they just thought that this was an essential part of the experience, obviously, because visual storytelling conventions were still developing. I think I made my point on that before, but that's yeah, it's very fascinating. Yeah, I mean, while we watch all of these texts and images, maybe you could let me know if you find this kind of video, you know, if you like this kind of video, if you find it informative, and you know, if you like this kind of stuff, you let me know, and we might make another one. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a nice change of pace, exploring cinema, exploring what was, you know, in the context of what is, context. Yeah. So I mean, again, whether the story of the Kelly Gang should be called the first feature-length film, it ultimately depends on how we define feature-length film. So like I mentioned in the beginning, there's only so little of this film that survived, these roughly 20 minutes. It was originally supposed to be a 70-minute film. So this is the reason why we're seeing so many of these like stills, like just photos and all of these texts. Of course, this is just how they interpreted, you know, how to tell a story back in the days, but they're also trying to fill in a little bit, you know, so you see how that is. I mean, all these still images, of course, are not exciting in the way cinema is today, but just look at these photos, though. Fantastic photos. I think that they get the message across pretty strongly, considering. This film also changed the business of cinema in a way, because the film was long and popular, as mentioned. Exhibitors could charge higher prices and advertise screenings as special events, which helped establish cinema as a sustainable business rather than a temporary curiosity, you see. And whether or not this was literally the first feature film matters less than the fact that it proved feature-length cinema would work economically. And just work in general. I mean, of course it did. How could it not? And the film's success here was also tied to the subject matter in the way that it's dramatizing a well-known and controversial national figure. So it tapped into the audience familiarity and curiosity. And this is something that later feature films would heavily rely on. You see, one of the most important things to understand here about this film is that it's not trying to be precise historical account. It's telling a folk story in a way. What are you doing up there? What are you doing? Stop that, get down. Anyway, the structure is episodic rather than tightly plotted. Sir, please come down. What are you doing up there? One aspect of this story that's rarely talked about is the fact that how it sits at the intersection between cinema and other popular media of its time. This film, it didn't emerge in a vacuum, you see. It grew out of cultural, you know, already saturated with Kelly's stories through newspapers, pamphlets, stage melodramas, and public debate. So in many ways, cinema here is inheriting an existing narrative ecosystem, you know, rather than inventing one from scratch. So, I mean, so there's also an important distinction here between the realism and the authenticity in this way. The film isn't realistic in a modern sense, you know, performances, they are so broad, staging is so theatrical, and details are so simplified. So it helps explain why this film feels so episodic. The structure mirrors of how people already encountered the Kelly story. So in this way, the film anticipates how cinema will later operate as a cultural memory machine. Wow, I mean, it doesn't preserve events exactly as they occurred. It preserves the version of events that matter to people at this time. But it is authentic, just in the way it shows us these contemporary attitudes. Oh no, oh, what's happening? Yeah, they go hands up again. So many hands up, you know, they're disrupting everyone. You know, just taking everything, you know, bit by bit. Film history, it isn't just about documenting the past. It's about understanding how the past was imagined, argued over, and emotionally processed. So when we look at this surviving footage here today, I feel we're not just watching fragments of a story. We're watching an early attempt to use cinema as a shared language, a way of turning history, controversy, and just collective memory into something visible, repeatable, and emotionally resonant. And all of this ambition here is just more than any single technical innovation. So taking all of this into the account, I feel that this film here is such a foundational moment in cinema history. What is the oldest film you've seen? Let me know. Comment down in the comment section. Let me know. What's going on right there? Yeah, you tell him. You tell him, boy. Sit down with him, yeah. Yeah, so much spurs on the screens. The Blob. The Blob is taking over. The Blob is going to take over the Kelly gang, their new leader. We desperately need the giant claw to come in here and take over the Blob, because the Blob seems to be, causing trouble here. It's no good. To put things in a little bit more of a perspective here, let's say Alfred Hitchcock. His first film was made in 1925, 19 years later after this. So just you can see how this film paved the way for so many things to come. And films like The Kid, Nosferatu, all of these films in the early 20s, these films that have, stayed with people for such a long time, came relatively shortly after this. These films that are studied, remembered, and loved. There's not such a long time, if you put that into perspective. Whenever the pacing feels slow or the staging feels primitive, I try to remember that this film isn't behind us. It's ahead of its time. It's reaching forward, trying to invent something that doesn't yet exist. I mean, that effort is what makes it remarkable. What's going on here? Aha. They're moving in. Oh, they're shooting them down. Yeah. It's a battle. The eternal battle between good and evil, saint and sinners. And still, they don't seem to be having any fun, do they? Assessing the situation, the police decide to drive out the gang by setting fire to the hotel. Why would you do that? Why would you be so mean? It's just hard to talk because this immerses you just so much. Just thinking about that this is a film from 1906. I mean, even with a Blob, I never knew that the Blob came so early in a motion picture. Just imagine this, what you're seeing. This is amazing. The Blob is just taking over the world here. I mean, by telling a story like this, sustained story about a controversial figure, the film demonstrates cinema power to shape collective memory in a way. After this, cinema increasingly became the place where societies rehearses their myth. So this film is one of the first to understand that responsibility, you see. Okay, what's he going out? Okay, boys, no more. It's too much. I surrender. No, okay. The brave priest to the rescue. The priest has arrived. Okay, we'll see what happens now. Okay. Here we go. Just the camera is still. There's lots of things going on. Imagine the people having to perform this like a live show, like a play. This is very fascinating what we see here, because they didn't know how to make it come clearly across that people are dying here. So they just decided to make the screen all red, the color palette. Very, very fascinating. Oh no. Oh, there we go. Oh, Steve and Dan. Come on, Steve and Dan, why did you have to do that? Oh, that's too bad. Oh, well, that's how it is sometimes, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, well. Now, I mean, obviously there were films that came before these, like short features, ranging from 20 seconds to, 12 minutes, Took to the Moon. But this was marketed as a major event. And there's the priest checking on them, trying to do his moral duties. Picks him up, yeah. Pick him up. Take him with you. Save his soul. It's about time, isn't it? Imagine, you see how fascinating this is. All of a sudden, it's red, symbolizing that people are dying. Let this message come across clearly, what's happening. I just find that very fascinating, don't you? Even though so much of this film is lost, what survives today reminds us that cinema was just discovering its most powerful tool. Not movement and not spectacle. Just going from key events to key events. That's what this film does. During the night, Ned Kelly makes his escape. Heavily weighted with his armor, he decides to come back at the break of day to see if he can rejoin his comrades. Okay. So you see what I'm saying here is just the story of the Kelly gang was relatively new in people's memories, so this is why they felt that this would work so well and back then. Oh no! The helmet! Darth Vader is here! Look at this. This is absurd. So the ability to shape meaning across time is very fantastic to explore here, I think, because this film, it doesn't really, it's so different from what we're used today. because we're just supposed to fill in the blanks, you see, going from key events to key events. But look at this. Look at this. Look at what's happening. Really take that in. From 1906. The Man in the Iron Mask is here. I didn't know they made such an early version of The Man in the Iron Mask. No, but I mean, all jokes aside, this is one of the most important, images in the film what we're seeing right here. This really did happen. Ned Kelly, he really did dress up like this in his final battle. So this is, wow. I mean, Kelly cannot take straight aim. His left hand being wounded. However, the police find his vulnerable. Yeah. The film's conclusion doesn't feel tragic in a conventional sense. It feels inevitable. I mean, there's no attempt to soften the outcome or reframe Kelly's fate as a redemption. So beyond its technical and economic importance, the story of the Kelly gang plays a crucial role in shaping Australian cinema itself, you see. Made only a few years after Federation. It uses this local historical figure, which we have mentioned before, the Ned Kelly. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you got that, right? Huh? Yeah. I'm just checking to see if my class is, paying attention. Yeah. So by doing this, it just shows how cinema could function not just as an entertainment, you see, but as a tool for cultural self-definition. Using some important things in life, to make them evolve on screen, make them come alive on screen in front of your eyes. Yeah. What a film. I mean, history. I mean, what a history. I mean, just imagine all these people having to do this in this one take. It's like a play somehow. It's so perfectly done. What we're watching here, it's so amazing. The gun blazing and the chaos and how they portray what's happening without the sounds here. Thus falls the last of the Kelly gang, and with the fall of Ned Kelly, the last of the Bush Rangers. National Film and Sound Archive. This is it. Thanks for hanging out with me today, guys. This was really something different, something new. Hope you enjoyed this one. Icelandic Psycho, over and out.